Now I'd like to help kick off the premiere of an exciting new comedy show, which you're all going to enjoy for a long, long time, starring Tom and Dick Smothers.
The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour didn't start as a revolution. It just sounded like fun. With its quick wit, offbeat sketches, and musical performances, the show lured audiences in with laughter before slipping in a razor-sharp commentary. In one early episode, a lighthearted musical number mimicking a military march took the stage, only to be abruptly cut by CBS before it could air. To viewers, it was just another missing segment. But behind the scenes, the network had flagged it for a subversive message, a veiled protest against the Vietnam War. Similarly, there's this one scene you'll say is unbelievable, but it wasn't edited. Let's look again at the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour to get full context. Pete Seeger's return and waist deep in the big muddy. In 1967, American folk singer and social activist Pete Seeger made a historic return to national television after years of political blacklisting. Seeger, once a member of the popular folk group The Weavers, had been blacklisted during the Red Scare of the 1950s due to his previous Communist Party affiliations and refusal to testify in full before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1955. Although never convicted of a crime, Seeger was denied access to most mainstream media for over a decade. His reappearance on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in September 1967 marked a symbolic and highly controversial moment in television history. The Smothers Brothers, Tom and Dick, had earned a reputation for mixing comedy with pointed political commentary. Their CBS variety show, though packaged as light entertainment, often pushed against the boundaries of network censorship. In inviting Pete Seeger to perform, the Smothers Brothers were not merely booking a musical act. They were making a statement. Seeger was scheduled to sing Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, a new anti-war ballad he had written earlier that year. The song, told from the perspective of a Second World War soldier ordered to march through a treacherous river by a blindly stubborn commanding officer, was widely interpreted as a thinly veiled critique of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Vietnam War policies. Seeger performed the song on September 10, 1967, during the taping of the episode. CBS, however, decided to cut the entire performance before the broadcast aired. The network did not initially provide a detailed explanation, only stating that the song was considered too political and not suitable for a general entertainment show. This act of censorship immediately became a lightning rod for controversy. Tom Smothers was vocal in his objection to the cut, arguing in public statements and internal CBS correspondence that the song merely reflected widespread public opposition to the war and that censoring it was both artistically dishonest and politically dangerous. He insisted that the show's role was not to promote any specific ideology, but to reflect reality as experienced and expressed by its viewers and artists. The backlash was swift and intense. Viewers who had attended the live taping, along with fans of Seeger and the Smothers Brothers, began writing letters, placing phone calls, and organizing petitions demanding that the network reinstate Seeger's performance. Newspapers including the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and Variety covered the controversy, noting the increasing tension between television executives and artists during a time of deep national unrest. Prominent figures in the arts, civil rights, and academia also joined the call for CBS to reconsider its position. In response to mounting public pressure, CBS relented. Pete Seeger was invited back to the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, and he re-performed Waist Deep in the Big Muddy on the February 25, 1968 episode. This marked a rare instance of a network reversing a censorship decision under public scrutiny. However, behind the scenes, the incident had a chilling effect. CBS tightened control after Big Muddy aired. The broadcast of Pete Seeger's Waist Deep in the Big Muddy on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in February 1968 marked a historic win for free speech in American television, but behind the scenes, it triggered a profound shift in CBS's internal policies and practices. After months of public pressure forced the network to reverse its original decision to censor the anti-war ballad, CBS executives responded by tightening control over the show in an unprecedented manner. The network's upper management, led by CBS television president Robert D. Wood and Vice President John Schneider, saw the airing not as a victory for the First Amendment, but as a potential liability. Internal memos from March 1968 document fears that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour might evolve into an unchecked vehicle for anti-government sentiment, under the guise of comedy and entertainment. According to producer George Sunga, who worked closely with the Smothers Brothers from the show's inception in 1967, the atmosphere in the CBS offices shifted immediately after the Seeger broadcast. Sunga later confirmed in interviews, including one featured in the 2002 documentary Smothered, that CBS began taping all production meetings. These recordings were reviewed by network executives to monitor Tom Smothers' statements and ensure nothing aired without prior approval. The intention, Sunga explained, was to create an administrative record that could justify disciplinary or legal actions if the show crossed any future editorial lines. It was the first time in CBS history that a variety show's creative meetings were recorded in this fashion. The network implemented an aggressive pre-approval process for all scripts, songs, and comedy sketches. William Tankersley, the CBS Standards and Practices executive assigned to the show, began exercising broad veto powers. His team reviewed every segment days before taping, sometimes requiring extensive changes or cuts to content they deemed politically sensitive. Among the topics most heavily scrutinized were the Vietnam War, civil rights, the 1968 presidential election, and anything perceived as mocking President Lyndon B. Johnson or government institutions. Writers like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, and Bob Einstein, who were part of the Smothers Brothers writing team at various points, later described this period as creatively suffocating. Reiner, in particular, noted that the constant revisions and threat of censorship made it increasingly difficult to maintain the show's signature tone of sharp, satirical commentary. The control extended beyond the writer's room. Guests invited to appear on the show were now subject to background checks and clearance by CBS management. Joan Baez, who appeared in November 1968 and made a brief dedication to her then-imprisoned husband, David Harris, a prominent draft resistor, was warned beforehand to avoid political statements. Although her statement was allowed to air, CBS cut the segment in several markets before re-airing it nationally days later in a revised format. Such decisions were made under increasing pressure from advertisers and network affiliates, many of whom expressed discomfort with the show's political tone. Affiliates in states like Texas, Alabama, and Mississippi filed complaints with CBS headquarters in New York, claiming that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was inappropriate for family viewing. CBS's concerns were not merely abstract. In April 1968, shortly after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the network convened an internal task force to reassess its entertainment programming. According to a memo dated April 16, 1968, found in the CBS corporate archive, the task force recommended that variety shows steer clear of contentious national issues unless fully vetted by senior editorial staff. Don't stop the carnival and the destruction of footage. In September 1968, amidst a year defined by assassinations, civil unrest, and a deeply polarizing war, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour aired what would become one of the most controversial and consequential moments in American television history. Harry Belafonte, a celebrated singer and civil rights activist, was invited to perform "Don't Stop the Carnival," a calypso tune steeped in West Indian rhythms and metaphorical irony. But what gave the performance its searing impact was not just the music, but the footage selected to accompany it. As Bellafonte sang, images of the violent clashes at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, held just a month earlier, played in the background, intercut with scenes of police beating demonstrators, tear gas filling the streets, and chaos erupting outside the International Amphitheater. The visual contrast between Belafonte's calm, almost sardonic delivery and the brutal imagery was deliberate, and the effect was unflinching. The segment was taped in advance for the September 15, 1968 episode. At the time, the DNC protests were still raw in the public consciousness. From August 26th to August 29th, thousands of demonstrators, many organized by groups like the Youth International Party and the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, descended upon Chicago to protest the nomination of pro-war Democrat Hubert Humphrey. The protests devolved into violence when Mayor Richard J. Daley ordered police to crack down aggressively. More than 600 people were arrested, hundreds were injured, and the resulting media coverage shocked a nation already reeling from the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in April and Robert F. Kennedy in June. Tom Smothers, already under intense scrutiny from CBS following earlier clashes over Vietnam-related content, pushed for the Belafonte segment to air in full. According to interviews with Smothers and staff producer Ken Fritz, the inclusion of the DNC footage was meant to frame "Don't Stop the Carnival" as a darkly satirical take on the idea of pretending that everything was normal while society unraveled. The song, originally a light Caribbean piece written by Norman Spann, also known as King Radio, had been reinterpreted for this performance as a critique of denialism and political suppression. CBS executives were alarmed. As internal memoranda later revealed during legal proceedings in the early 1970s, network president Robert D. Wood and Standards and Practices head William Tankersley were particularly concerned about the visual juxtaposition. They viewed it not only as inflammatory, but also as a direct challenge to the network's nonpartisan stance. When the footage was reviewed by network censors just days before airing, they made the decision to pull the entire segment from the episode. The official reason cited was that it violated broadcast neutrality and could be interpreted as anti-government propaganda. Tom Smothers vehemently objected. In meetings with CBS, he argued that the segment reflected public sentiment and real events, not partisan messaging. According to Smothers, the performance was about showing America what America looked like. When CBS refused to compromise, Smothers attempted to at least retain the master footage of the performance for archival purposes or future release. But the network went even further than censorship. It ordered the master tape destroyed. The destruction of the Belafonte segment remains one of the rare instances in broadcast history where politically sensitive material was not just suppressed, but permanently erased. CBS officials, facing backlash over the network's growing reputation as a censorious gatekeeper, denied this at the time. However, testimonies from former staffers, including a 1989 interview with editor Don Einstein, brother of cast member Bob Einstein, confirmed that the order to destroy the tape came directly from CBS executive John Schneider, who oversaw programming. The decision was framed internally as a preventative measure to avoid future leaks or legal exposure. Unbeknownst to CBS, a rough, lower-quality black-and-white copy of the original segment had been kept by Tom Smothers, who preserved it in his private archive. For decades, the tape remained unreleased and largely unknown to the public. It resurfaced only in the early 2020s when filmmaker Robert Bader, who had been working on a retrospective documentary about the Smothers Brothers, discovered it while cataloging material for PBS. The footage, though degraded, clearly showed Bellafonte singing in front of the DNC riot scenes, offering a haunting reminder of both the performance's power and the extent of its suppression. In 2022, the rediscovered segment aired publicly for the first time in the PBS documentary The Smothers Brothers, Comedy and Censorship in the Age of Dissent. But wait, there's more from where that came. More censorship and silence. In November 1968, Elaine May delivered a bold, satirical sketch on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour that directly confronted the growing culture of censorship in American television. Filmed at CBS Television City in Los Angeles, her minimalist performance listed banned topics, ranging from four-letter words to critiques of the FBI and the Vietnam War, before culminating in the assertion that censorship itself had become unmentionable. The sketch, performed without edits or bleeping, was a direct, unflinching indictment of network control. CBS, uncomfortable with its candor, pulled it before broadcast, calling it inflammatory and subversive. Tom Smothers threatened resignation, arguing that comedy should challenge authority, not bow to it. His protest was rebuffed. Although never aired in its time, Elaine May privately preserved a copy of the skit. Decades later, it resurfaced in the 2022 PBS documentary The Smothers Brothers, Comedy and Censorship in the Age of Dissent. Similarly, on February 9, 1969, Tom Smothers stepped out of his usual comedic persona to deliver a candid, unscripted monologue to a live studio audience at CBS Television City, directly criticizing the ongoing U.S. bombing campaign in Vietnam. His remarks were met with applause from the crowd, but immediately flagged by CBS for removal from the national broadcast. Citing a violation of their policy against political editorializing, CBS executives, including Standards head Perry Lafferty and chairman William S. Paley, ordered the segment cut. Internal memos later confirmed the network's discomfort was rooted less in policy and more in growing anxiety over the show's unpredictability and defiant tone, especially as it began to challenge not just political leaders, but the very institution of television censorship. Though the monologue was buried at the time, Smothers preserved a personal copy, and it resurfaced in the aforementioned 2022 PBS documentary, reminding viewers of how powerful and dangerous truth-telling can be in tightly controlled media environments. Internal surveillance and CBS dossier. Tension between the brothers. By late 1968, as the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour embraced sharper political satire and increasingly challenged CBS's authority, differences began to surface between Tom and Dick Smothers, not in ideology, but in approach. While both opposed the Vietnam War and shared progressive values, Tom leaned into provocation and moral defiance, whereas Dick, more cautious and business-minded, grew uneasy with the show's escalating confrontational tone. He voiced concerns in private meetings that their blend of comedy and music was being overshadowed by overt political protest, which could alienate audiences and advertisers. Despite these reservations, Dick never distanced himself publicly from Tom. Instead, he continued to advocate pragmatically behind the scenes, believing the show's survival depended on striking a balance between defiance and accessibility. Their contrasting temperaments became most visible during controversies like the Harry Belafonte segment, where Dick felt blindsided by Tom's editorial decisions, yet still condemned CBS's censorship rather than his brother's activism. This dynamic with Tom pushing boundaries and Dick trying to preserve the platform, formed the backbone of their working relationship through the show's most contentious moments. In later reflections, Dick acknowledged that while Tom confronted power directly, he himself had tried to keep the show alive from within. Their creative tension, far from divisive, ultimately allowed the show to endure as long as it did, and turned both men into unlikely icons in the broader battle over truth, media, and the limits of television dissent. Cancellation of the show. By 1969, the relationship between the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and CBS had deteriorated into something more hostile than a typical creative dispute. CBS had begun compiling a covert dossier on Tom Smothers, documenting his public statements, media appearances, and even off-air speeches. This was uncovered decades later by historian Catherine Kramer Brownell in private network archives. What started as oversight of controversial content evolved into a near-paranoid surveillance strategy led by Standards head William Tankersley, who labeled Smothers a threat to the network's stability due to his outspoken political views. CBS went as far as recording production meetings under the pretense of legal archiving, using the transcripts to flag remarks for potential censorship. Writers and producers gradually became aware of this intrusive scrutiny, which eroded trust and created a climate of internal suspicion. Smothers later revealed that he had sensed this surveillance and believed CBS was building a legal case to cancel the show under the guise of contractual failures. That suspicion proved accurate. By April 1969, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was abruptly canceled by CBS under the official claim of missed production deadlines. The show, which had grown into a cultural lightning rod with its anti-war messaging and criticism of establishment authority, had attracted both immense popularity and powerful enemies. Declassified documents from the Nixon administration, including a memo from H.R. Haldeman, confirmed that the White House viewed the show as dangerously subversive and had pressured CBS to intervene. The cancellation came shortly after the network rejected a segment featuring Joan Baez and cut an unscripted anti-war monologue by Tom Smothers. However, the brothers, despite their differences, stood united throughout and sued CBS for wrongful termination. They argued that the network's censorship practices violated both their contract and their First Amendment rights. Though they ultimately won the lawsuit in 1975 and were awarded over $776,000 in damages, the victory felt hollow to Tom, who lamented that they had won legally but lost culturally. The case revealed how CBS had manipulated its own approval processes to suppress politically charged content, setting a chilling precedent across the broadcast industry. Networks became more cautious, steering away from controversial themes and quietly instituting soft censorship, altering scripts, cutting segments, and manipulating laugh tracks to blunt any political edge. Artists like Joan Baez and recurring cast members such as Lee French saw their work sidelined, while future creators learned that challenging the status quo could carry career-ending risks. The Smothers Brothers fight became a symbol of artistic resistance in an era of rising media control, and though their platform was silenced, their legacy endures as a warning about the cost of truthfulness. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.